David Rice is just a regular teenager living in a small rural town. He chats with Millie, a classmate he's into. David gives Millie a snow globe as a gift, and she happily accepts it. Mark, another classmate, jumps in and grabs the gift, playfully teasing David. So their classmate just tosses the snow globe right into the middle of a frozen lake, and David goes for it, trying to get it back. Millie is trying to talk him out of it, but David keeps going. David reaches the snow globe, but the ice cracks, and he tumbles underneath. Millie rushes over to help, but David ends up getting stuck underneath. The current pulls David down more, and he can't get back to the surface now. Out of nowhere, he ends up right in the middle of the public library. David feels totally lost and confused, but he tries to leave the library without drawing any attention. David's on his way home, and his dad, William, points out that he's running late. David lives with his dad, since his mom left when he was a kid. William asks David where he had been, but David doesn't respond. William gets mad and runs after David into his room. David locks his room, but William is trying to push his way in. Right when William bursts in, David vanishes and then shows up in the library again. David sees that his new ability might just be the ticket to a better life. He gets home and pulls out some cash he saved up. He's thinking about moving to a bigger city to kick off a new life. David decides to head to the park to practice and see if he can get a better grip on his abilities. He flips through a tourist magazine, checking out various attractions around the world, wishing he could teleport to those spots. He spots the Empire State Building and thinks back to the time he was there with his mom, Mary. Suddenly, things in his room start flying around, and he finds himself teleporting to the Empire State Building. David then figures out that he can only teleport to places he's already visited. David, short on cash, figures he might as well use his powers to pull off a bank heist. He walks into a bank and asks to use the bathroom, and while he's heading there, he catches a glimpse of the inside of the bank's vault. That evening, David pops into the vault and grabs as much cash as he can. He takes a few trips, loading up his bag every time he comes back. The next day, they start looking into the bank robbery. Roland Cox shows up and tells the bank manager he's with the government. He asks for all the video surveillance footage and the names of everyone who has entered the bank in the last month. Roland points out that the bank vault was never opened, and the authorities are clueless about how the robbery happened. Roland seems to know some folks who can teleport and thinks that one of them might have pulled off the theft. Years go by, and David is now living in a penthouse apartment in downtown New York. David has it all, living life to the fullest and doing whatever he pleases. His apartment has pictures from all over the world, and he even has a secret room for currencies from different countries. David teleports to a bar in London and sees a beautiful woman. He teleports to her without a second thought, and another guy, Griffin, catches him in the act. He spends the night with the girl, and the next day, he sets off to Fiji to catch some huge waves. He then goes to Egypt and has lunch on top of the Sphinx. A man teleports in a tropical jungle trying to make his escape. He teleports through the wilderness, but there's a cable attached to him, so he can't leave. Roland shows up and walks over to him. The teleporter wants to know why Roland did this to him, and Roland replies that people who can teleport are abominations and need to be exterminated. He stabs the man, and he dies. Roland gets a phone call about the robbery that happened a few years ago. David gets back to his apartment in New York and finds Roland there. Roland tells David he's looking into a bank robbery, but he's not with the police. David tells Roland to leave, but Roland grabs a baton and zaps David with electricity instead. David gives teleporting a shot, but he can't seem to get more than a few meters away. Roland dashes in, zapping David once more and sending him tumbling off the ledge. Roland shoots a cable, connecting his baton to David. Roland sticks his baton to the floor, which keeps David anchored and prevents him from teleporting too far. David is really trying to get away, teleporting to a secret room in the wall and successfully cutting off the cable. David grabs a bunch of bags filled with cash and vanishes. He shows up again in his dad's house, back in his old room. William hears David coming and hurries over to him. William pleads with David to stick around, saying he's been feeling like he's losing his mind ever since his son went missing. David tells William he's not going crazy, but then he disappears just as quickly. The next day, David searches for Millie and spots her working at a nearby bar. He runs into his old school bully, Mark, and they end up in a brawl. So David just teleports Mark into a bank vault and leaves him there. David comes back to Millie, and they chat for a bit. David chats with Millie about his new job in banking and asks her how things are going in the small town. Millie shares that she still dreams of traveling the world, and David offers her a ride. Millie is super excited to hear this and tells David she'd love to go with him. Griffin is watching closely from behind them. A few hours later, David and Millie are in Rome, heading to check out the Colosseum. So, Roland is pretending to work for the CIA just to get to Mark, who's hanging out at a police station. He asks him what went down at the bank, and Roland finds out about Millie, discovering that she just got to Rome. David and Millie are in an apartment in Rome, chatting about their lives and how they've managed to get through the last couple of years. David and Millie share a romantic moment, kissing passionately. Later that day, David sneaks Millie into the Colosseum, and they wander around, dodging guards. David separates from Millie to unlock a door and finally runs into Griffin. Griffin shows up as another person who can teleport, calling himself and others like him jumpers. Griffin calls David out on his flashy and laid-back lifestyle, letting him know that a group called the Paladins is set on taking out all jumpers. As he explains, a pair of paladins show up. The paladins come closer and pull out their batons, and then a fight starts. David attempts to run, but gets caught by one of the electrified cables. His ability to teleport is disabled again. Griffin then fights the two paladins and quickly overpowers them. He takes out both pursuers and tells David he's been taking down paladins for a while now. He just teleports off to his secret lair. David spots a jump scar left by Griffin's jump and decides to follow it. Griffin tells him to back off, and David goes back to Millie. David takes Millie away, leading her out of the Colosseum. But Millie wants to know what's going on. Just as David was about to explain, the police showed up and arrested him for breaking into the Colosseum. David is at the police station being questioned. He insists he's just a tourist who broke some rules and feels sorry about it. The officers leave David, saying he should wait for the magistrate from the US Embassy. While David is waiting, a woman walks in, and he realizes it's Mary, his mom. Mary tells David he has just 30 seconds before more paladins show up and hands him a key for his handcuffs. Mary rushes back outside, and David runs after her, but he can't catch up. David meets up with Millie again, and they both head to the airport. At the airport, David tells Millie they need to part ways. Millie feels let down by the news, but goes ahead with her flight by herself. So, Roland shows up at William's house and says he's with the IRS. Roland asks about David, but William isn't very welcoming or helpful. William says to Roland that he hasn't seen David in 8 years. He talks about how Mary left him and David when David was 5. William tells Roland to leave, but Roland says no. David gets to Griffin's hideout and notices the walls covered with pictures and info about paladins from all over the world. David asks Griffin why paladins are killing jumpers, and Griffin explains that the war has been happening since the Dark Ages. Griffin says the paladins are religious fanatics who think that only God should have the power to teleport. He tells David that paladins won't think twice about killing anyone just to reach him. David realizes his dad and Millie might be in trouble, so he teleports to William and discovers him passed out on the floor. He teleports them to a hospital, and medical staff hurry to assist William. David goes back to Griffin's hideout looking to find out more about Roland because he plans to kill him. Griffin thinks it's pointless since he's been following Roland for over 10 years, and every time they meet, Griffin just ends up with more scars. David wants to help catch Roland, but Griffin says no. Griffin teleports to China, and David follows him, still trying to convince Griffin to let him help out. Griffin finally agrees when David mentions he has an idea of where Roland might show up next, related to Millie. They decide to split up. David will go after Millie, and Griffin will head back to the hideout to arm himself. David gets to Millie's apartment. Millie is taken aback to see David again and tells him she doesn't want to be linked to him anymore. Millie tells David to go, but David hears Roland and a couple of other guys coming in. David has no choice but to come clean to Millie, admitting that he's a jumper. Millie can't believe what she's seeing with David's powers and totally freaks out, running away. Realizing they're in danger, David quickly grabs her and teleports them to Griffin's hideout. Roland and the other paladins walk into Millie's apartment and notice it's empty, but Roland spots a jump scar. They pull out a device and place it under the jump scar, and a portal begins to form. They're trying to reopen the jump scar to follow David, David meets up with Griffin, but Griffin is really upset to see Millie there with him. Griffin talks to David about the Paladin's machine and mentions that bringing Millie to the hideout would just lead the Paladins straight to them. David and Griffin take a look at the jump scar and notice it's getting bigger. Just a few seconds later, Roland shows up. David and Griffin are hiding, and while David is tucked away, he spots a picture of Mary on Griffin's wall of known Paladins. So David gets hit with this electrified cable and ends up stuck against a wall. Griffin walks in with a flamethrower in hand. Griffin and Roland end up in a fight, with Griffin using his teleporting skills to take the lead. Roland puts up a solid fight, making good use of the Paladin's technology. Griffin punches Roland out of the hideout and then teleports back with a bus speeding toward Roland. Roland barely has time to react, yet he still manages to dodge the bus coming his way. Millie sees David stuck to a wall and tries to help him, but then Roland shows up, looking like he wants to kill her. Millie is frozen in place, but Griffin shows up again with the flamethrower and sends Roland flying back into the jump scar. Griffin jumps in right after him. Roland and Griffin are back in Millie's apartment and the fight goes on. Once they're back in the hideout, Millie manages to free David but lets him know she wants to head home. She just wants to stay out of everything going on and get back to her regular life. David has no other option and goes along with it. As he's getting ready to take Millie back, Griffin shows up again, successfully carrying the Paladin's jump scar opener. Even with the jump scar still active, the Paladins manage to launch a cable and grab Millie, bringing her back to the apartment. David's looking to save Millie, but Griffin's getting ready with a bomb. David feels a bit lost, but Griffin reassures him that this is his opportunity to put an end to the Paladins for good. He's planning to teleport to the apartment with the bomb. David protests and then teleports away with the bomb. Griffin runs after him, and they end up in a fight, teleporting to all sorts of places. They just teleport to Egypt, San Francisco, New York, all while trying to get the bomb's remote detonator. They find themselves in a war-torn country, and Griffin finally gets his hands on the detonator. But Griffin doesn't notice that a pylon is about to fall on them. David teleports Griffin into the pylon, and the huge surge of electricity grabs hold of him, pinning him down. Griffin is trying to talk David out of going back to the apartment, saying he won't have a chance against 5 Paladins. But David is set on rescuing Millie. David gets back to the apartment and finds Millie, but then he gets hit by 5 electrified cables that the Paladins have set up there. David is having a tough time, still trying to teleport away. The whole apartment shakes really hard. Every time David tries to teleport, the apartment goes with him since the wires are attached to both David and the apartment. He grunts and shouts, making the apartment walls shake and crack. So he finally teleports the whole apartment back to the lake, the place where he first found out about his abilities. Most of the Paladins are disabled, and a few of them drown. Then David teleports the apartment back to the library. David wakes up and notices that Roland is still alive. David takes Roland and leaves him in the middle of the Grand Canyon. Time goes by and David finds his mom. Mary's daughter answers the door, and David and Mary finally talk. Mary says she's a Paladin too. When David teleported for the first time at 5, Mary had to make the tough choice to leave him behind to keep him safe from the other Paladins. Now that they're back together, David wonders what will happen next. Mary replies that she'd give him a head start. David goes back to Millie, who's waiting for him outside. They hold hands, share a smile, and then teleport away.